Hello learners, I welcome you back to our course of Environmental Economics, and I am Dr. Aparna Samudra from the Department of Economics, RTM Nagpur University, Nagpur. We have been discussing about the valuation of the environment and why it is important. In the previous lectures, we had categorized the various values on which we evaluate the environment. And then we had started discussing the techniques used for environmental valuation. In this lecture, we will be going further with the second technique of environmental valuation under revealed preference method, which is called as hedonic price method. So, we will understand the concept of hedonic price method. Thereafter, we will derive the hedonic price and demand function. And then we will understand what are the challenges which come in the way of using hedonic price method. Let me just give you a conceptual background of hedonic price method. Hedonic price method, as I have told you in the previous lecture, is a revealed preference method of valuation. If you remember, in the last lecture, we have talked about another technique of revealed preference method of valuation. Do you remember that technique? Just give it a thought. What technique was that? So this is the second technique of hedonic price method. The first technique which we discussed was the travel cost method. In hedonic price method, what we will be going to do is, it is basically based on the idea that environmental quality can affect the market prices of certain goods and services. That is, if we are going to buy a market-based good, if we are going into a product market, the price of that market good or services does get affected by the environmental quality which is surrounding that environmental good or service. So, hedonic pricing basically is using a surrogate market for placing a value on the environmental quality. That is, it is an indirect method of giving value to the environment. The most common application of hedonic pricing involves studying residential housing prices and many a times in the labor market to understand that how wages differ when people work in different difficult environmental conditions. Then how do we expect their wages to be different from the others who are working in a little easier or better environmental quality? So, but the most common way of doing environmental valuation, the application is seen in pricing of the residential houses. As you might be knowing, the word hedonic, what does the word hedonic means? Hedonic word has taken its origin from Greek word. And what does it mean? It means pleasure. That is, how much pleasure do you get in buying that goods and services is not only dependent on the physical characteristics of that market good, but it also depends on the type of environmental quality that good is situated in. So, the hedonic pricing method relies on the information provided by the households when they make their location decisions. That is, if for example you wish to buy a house, what this method is trying to say is that when people are putting value on the residential house they want to purchase, it will not only be the structural factors which are going to have an impact on the house price, but to a large extent people may be also basing their decisions or maybe also paying a higher price or a lower price depending on what is the environmental quality in which this particular housing location is there. Therefore, what hedonic price method is trying to do is, it is attempting to calculate the price people are willing to pay for a property due to its environmental attributes. That is, apart from the other attributes which we generally attach when we are buying a house or when a rational person is buying a house, this particular method also attempts to calculate that how much people are willing to pay. See, if you remember, we have already talked about the concept of willing to pay and willing to accept. So, as I told you, generally in all the environmental valuation methods, we are taking the concept, we are using willing to pay. Right. So what we do in hedonic price method is that we ask people how much more or how much less you are willing to pay for a particular property and how much value they attach to the environmental attributes where this property is located. So in the hedonic price method, what all we are going to consider. Generally, when we try to derive the price of a house, it gets determined by various factors. One of the most important factor which determines the pricing of the house is the characteristic of that property and the community in which that property is located. So what can be these characteristics? For example, the number of bedrooms in that house, the square footage, the lot size. Okay, then where is this particular house, in which community, in which neighborhood it is located? So that is one characteristic, physical characteristic, which we see, which determines the price of that particular house. Another important feature which can have an impact on the price of the house is, of course, the structural characteristic, but the second is the neighborhood characteristics. That is, which type of locality this house is located. What is its proximity to the public services system? What kind of quality of school system is available nearby? What is the proximity to the public transportation? So, the neighborhood characteristic, that is the locality characteristics, how easily the market is available nearby. So these are the also criteria which determine the price of the house. So one becomes the structural characteristic, like we have just said, the number of bedrooms in that particular flat, the square footage, the number of balconies that you have, the type of construction. Apart from this, what is the proximity of that residential property to the, let us say, the quality of schools, quality of education, what is the proximity to the public transport, what is the proximity to the nearest medical facilities. They also have an impact on the pricing of that particular household. But apart from this, when we are doing the hedonic price method, since we are talking about environmental valuation, the third characteristic which we take into consideration is the environmental quality or the natural resource variables like air quality, visibility, noise pollution. Let us say, is there a sea view from that house, or is there a lake view from this house, or the proximity to a natural area. So this would mean that if we are trying to understand that what are the variables which have an impact on the price of a particular house, it is dependent on the characteristics of the property, the type of neighborhood, the quality of neighborhood, and then the environmental quality variables. So therefore, we can say that the price of this property is related to its own characteristics, as we have just seen, the characteristics of the neighborhood in which it is located, the community where it is located, and the environmental characteristics. Therefore, if non-environmental factors, for example, we are talking about the structure of the house, the number of the rooms in that particular residential property, the lot size, the neighborhood quality, if they're all controlled, if they remain the same for all types of houses, then this would mean the difference in the price in that household can be attributed to the difference in the environmental quality. I will again repeat what we have said. What we have said here is that the price of a particular house or a residential property gets determined by the structural characteristic of that house, the quality of the neighborhood, and the environmental quality. If, for example, we are trying to see the price of house A and house B, which have similar structural and neighborhood characteristics, but if the type of environment in which they are situated is different, and there is a difference in price because of that, we can say that this has happened due to the difference in the environmental quality. So, just I will give you an example for this method that we have been discussing, that is the hedonic price method. If I just said, if all characteristics of the properties and neighborhood throughout an area were the same. Okay, that is if we are talking about two different types of locations, but those locations have a similar neighborhood characteristics, similar proximity, quality of schools, proximity to the healthcare facilities, quality of the healthcare facilities same. If everything is the same, also the structural characteristics of these two houses in these two different localities are the same, but there one house is located in an area where air pollution is high or the level of air quality is low, and the other house is located where the air quality is better. Then that house with better air quality, if it is costing more, this would mean that this price change or the price gap has happened because people valued air quality more. So this higher price reflects the value of the clean air. So the difference in the price of these two properties would help us to value the environment, that is, give a monetary value to the air quality. This graph, if you see, this is just a diagrammatic representation of what we have been saying till now. If this S curve represents the supply of that residential property and D1 is the demand of the house, let us say D1 is the demand of house in the locality where the air quality is low, and D2 represents the demand of the households in those areas where the air quality is high. So the gap that you see between D1 and D2, this let us say delta D, can be because of the difference in the air quality. So the price difference, which we say, let us say DP1, is happening because people are willing to pay a higher price for a house which is located in an area with a better air quality. I will just show you this also. For example, how do we determine the equilibrium price? We say S is equal to D1 and S is equal to D2. So if you see this, if we talk about intersection of S and D1, you will get this price P1. Whereas when you see for S is equal to D2, price is P2. So difference, the price P2 minus P1 is equal to DP. DP means this is the difference in the price which has happened because there was a difference in the air quality. Okay, so it's a very simple explanation, but this particular technique of hedonic price methods use certain econometrics and statistical techniques to derive these values. We will be seeing that in this lecture as well. So as I just said, in the hedonic price methods, statistical equations are used to estimate the relationship between the price of the good or property and its attributes or characteristics. That is, we will be using a mathematical equation or statistical equation to estimate that how does the price of the housing change if there is a change in the attributes of these houses. So, this estimation of the valuation will involve two steps. In the first step, what we will be doing is, we will be estimating the hedonic price function. Once we have estimated the hedonic price function, we will estimate the demand curve. Yesterday also, when we did the travel cost method, we had talked about that how it is important to derive a demand curve, because once we get a demand curve from an individual and then we aggregate the demand curves of all the individuals, we will be able to find what is the willingness to pay by the people for a typical environmental quality. So that will help to make a decision regarding what should be done to the environmental quality or what monetary value should be attached to an environmental quality. So just let us go further in understanding these two steps of estimation of hedonic price function and estimation of a demand curve. Very simple mathematical and statistical equations we will be using to understand this. Now, the first step, as we said, is that we have to estimate the hedonic price function. Now, how do we estimate this? It involves determining the relationship between the price of the good or the property and its attributes or characteristics. That is, we are trying to understand that how does the price of that property, how much it is dependent on which factors and which factors to what extent impact the price of that property. As we've just said in just a few minutes back, that the price of the housing is basically dependent on three things. One is the structural characteristic, other is the neighborhood characteristic, and third is the environmental variables. So we will be expressing all these three functions in terms of a hedonic price function. This relationship between the price of the property and the variables which affect it. What three variables we are saying? The structural variables, the neighborhood characteristics, and the environmental quality. So we can express them in form of this kind of a function. We all know what is a function. That is, there are a few independent things which have an impact on the dependent variable. Okay, so there is a dependent variable. That is, the answer of this variable is, for its value, is going to be dependent on certain independent things. So which change, when these independent variables change, it changes the value of the dependent variable. So in our case, the dependent variable is the price of the house, which we have represented by PH. So PH is the price of the house because we are trying to understand or derive the hedonic price function. So we are saying that the price of a house is dependent. On what it is dependent? We say it is dependent on SI, which means the site features. That is, what are the structural features of this house? What can be the structural features? Structural features, as we've said, is, for example, what is the plot size? What is the quality of construction? How much square foot built-up area is there? What type, how many balconies are there? How many bathrooms are there? So they're all the structural characteristic of a house. So SI represents the site features. Then we have NJ, which is another independent variable, which we are saying are the neighborhood characteristics. What do you mean by neighborhood characteristics? We have seen, for example, if you intend to go and buy a house, you go and see that everything is, you like the structure and everything, but you see the neighborhood is not, there are no very well-connected roads, there is no availability of public transport is not there, probably good quality schools are not there. Then what happens is that you do not attach a very high value even though the structural characteristics of house are very good. On the other hand, if these neighborhood characteristics or features are very appealing, you will be willing to place a greater price on this particular house. So NJ represents what? It represents the neighborhood characteristics. And then we come to the third variable, independent variable, which we have said is QK. QK in this case we are saying is the environmental quality features, which can be the type of air quality, type of how much noise pollution is there. So that all are determining the environmental quality, and we have given the word I, subscript for S is I, subscript for N is J, and subscript for Q is K, where I means the features, structural features can vary from 1 to M. Structural features of neighborhood can vary from 1 to represented by J can vary from 1 to N. K represents the characteristic features of the environment quality, which can vary from 1 to M. Okay, so this is 1 to M. So the function which we derive, if we want to plot this function can be linear or a non-linear function. I'm sure you may be knowing the difference between linear and non-linear. Non-linear function is a straight line, that is, the change remains constant, whereas in a non-linear function, it is a curvature function. Generally, it is seen that a hedonic price function interprets a non-linear function. So I will not be going into great detail about linear and non-linear, but for the sake of understanding, we are saying that functional form of this hedonic price function, when you plot it on a graph, it may give you a linear function or a non-linear function. So what are we doing? We have the first step is we have derived the hedonic price function, wherein we are saying that the price of house is dependent on three most important variables: structure, neighborhood characteristics, and air quality. Now, this function which we have just seen in this case, where pH is equal to function of SI, NJ, and QK, this can be represented in a equation form like this, where we say Pi is equal to beta 0 plus beta 1 xi1 plus beta 2 x2 i2 and so on till, and this represents your error term. What does it show? It shows that Pi is the price of the property, right? Xi are the, xi1, xi2 to xin are the various attributes of the property, which can be structural features, which can be the neighborhood features, which can be the environmental features. Beta 1, beta 2 until beta n represents what we call as coefficients, and they represent the marginal values of the attributes. That is, if there is a change in this attribute xi2, then this change in xi2, how much change does it bring in Pi? Okay, that is what you mean by beta 2. So beta 2 basically tells you that if one particular attribute, let's say xi2 changes, then because of this change, other things remaining constant, if other features remain constant, but only let us say xi2 represents the air quality. Now, if this air quality improves, and because of this increased change in the air quality, how much does your price of that house changes? That is measured by your beta 2. Similarly, if the first characteristic, let's say xi1 changes, because of that change, how much does the price change? That is measured by beta 1. But all this we are saying is that, for example, if xi1 is changing, at that time xi2, xi3 till xin, there is no change in it. So there is only the change in one value which is bringing a change in the price, and that is measured by the coefficients which we call as beta. Since if there are n number of attributes of the property, the beta values you will have beta 1, beta 2, beta 3 till beta n. This beta 1, beta 2, beta 3 are also called as implicit function or the rent differentials, because the change in the rent or change in the price of property is there because there is a change in one particular attribute. Now, I have just given this graph for your purpose. Let us say this MVA represents the marginal value for the person A, for by which we have differentiated. Marginal value is for person B, and on the x-axis we have air quality, right? And on the y-axis we are measuring rent differential and marginal values. Correct. As the air quality is decreasing, your rent differential is also falling, because as the localities have similar kind of air quality, why will people pay extra for a better air quality? Marginal values of consumer A and B are also downward sloping, indicating that the marginal utility is diminishing. Okay. So if a person is valuing air quality more than person B, then what will happen is that he will be paying a higher rent compared to person B. So this is how we get the individual equilibrium in the housing market. So if there is a property A which has a better air quality, it will also demand a greater rental compared to property B, which is located in an area with a lower air quality. So this is the rent differential. So hedonic price function, as we are saying, is basically we are differentiating the function with respect to any one of the characteristic. Okay, and when we differentiate it, we get, as I just told you, an implicit price function of that characteristic. Okay, for example, we have said if our equation said beta 1 is a coefficient if x1 of characteristic of that property change. Because of that, how much is the change in the price of x? So that we had measured by beta 1. What is the change in price because there is a change in the characteristic x1? Okay, why it is called as an implicit function? It is called as an implicit function because it is revealed to us indirectly through the amounts the people are prepared to pay to get good quality water or good quality air. Okay, so as we have just said that if x1 changes, what is the change in the price? It will be given by beta 1. Now, when you do a hedonic price, when we use hedonic price method, we require certain information. For example, we need to measure the environmental amenity of interest. For example, if you want to talk about air quality, we need to measure what is the level of various emissions or what is the distance from the waste particular site. We also need to understand the time series data of the property price and household characteristic to get the clarity on what are the, so that we can compare the structure and the neighborhood characteristics and what has happened to the price. So the first step is over. We have seen the second step is now we have to talk about estimation of the demand function. We have understood the price, now we understood the demand. So estimating the demand function in the context of hedonic price analysis, what does it involve? It involves how the quantity demanded of a good or property varies with its price and other attributes. That is, if the price of that property changes, how much will its quantity demand changes? That is, for example, a simple law of demand, that if there is a change in price, a change in demand. So when we are talking about demand function, till now what we have done in the first step is, we have just seen that what are the things which are having an impact on the price, right? But what exactly we need is that if there is a change in price, what happens to the demand? So that is what we will be doing now, that we will be estimating the demand function. So unlike the other demand function that focus on quantity as a dependent variable, we have just seen that in hedonic pricing, price itself is becoming a dependent variable because price of the residential property is dependent on environmental characteristics. Price is dependent on the structural features. Price is dependent on the neighborhood characteristics. So unlike the other where we say that the price is determining the quantity, here price itself is becoming dependent on a few things. Okay, so therefore, when we estimate the demand function, we will say, take the first of all, the price function, that is this price of this property I is dependent on xi1, xi2 till xin. And then we will invert this price function to get a demand function. So where if you see this xij is a function of pi and zi. What are xij? Xij is the quantity or quality of the attribute j of property I. And pi is the property of I property I, and zi represents the other factors which may influence the quantity or the quality attributes. So we are going to derive the demand function by inverting the hedonic price function. Okay. Now, after you have derived the demand function and the price function, then demand curves are derived for each individual, and then once we derive the demand curve, we are going to aggregate the demand of all these, and then we will be able to understand that by calculating the area under the demand curve for a given quality or quantity of the attribute, that how much people are willing to pay for the improvement in that quantity or quality. So, because we all know that area under the curve will be, we'll be able to find the consumer surplus because of that. For example, if we examine different hedonic price functions in different cities, we will have an implicit price in each city, the average quality, income, etc. And then the locus of all these individual demand functions will give us the equilibrium price. And then, for example, let us say using that equations which we have made, you get two lines like this, wherein this line represents a house, demand function of a house with no lake view, and this represents a demand function with a lake view. So there are two types of houses. One has a lake view, one does not have a lake view, and we want to understand that how having a natural resource view in front of your house, how much people are willing to pay. So using those regression equations, if we get these two equations and we put it on a graph with house size on the x-axis and house price on the y-axis, what do we see is that there is a gap. This gap is basically telling us that people are willing to pay, let us say, 30,000 rupees more or 30 lakhs rupees more to get a house which has a lake view. So the gap, which we calculated as an implicit function, is telling us, letting us know that how by improving environmental quality or giving additional environmental attribute in a house, how the price of that house changes. Now, what are the certain advantages of hedonic price method? The first is a relatively straightforward and uncontroversial method. We have already seen in the travel cost method, contingent valuation method, that what kind of challenges arise. And it's fairly easy because we get data on the actual market price of the property. Also, property markets are relatively efficient in responding to information. We see immediate change in the property values if there is certain change in the environmental or the neighborhood characteristics. And the data on the property sales and characteristics are generally readily available through many sources. And many authentic sources you will get this data. And if data is readily available, it also becomes a little inexpensive method, because unlike contingent valuation method where we have to do a lot of survey, talking to the people, which involves a lot of money, it saves time as well as the money. But HPM is also not without certain challenges. Let us just have a look at what are the challenges of hedonic price method. The first is it is very data intensive, because you are calculating that what value people are giving to what attributes. So it cannot be a very small sample size, and because if you want to generalize it, you need to have very different localities with different characteristics, and then only we will be able to decompose the effect of each and every characteristic. Then what happens is sometimes is that households may not have perfect information about the prices and the characteristics in the property market. Many a times this happens, people may not be having complete and accurate information. Also, there are high transaction costs which may negate the benefits of moving. What are we saying? We are asking people that if I give you a house in a better with a better air quality, will you be willing to move? And and how much price you will be willing to pay. But sometimes there are a lot of transaction costs which are involved. For example, I may need to switch my job. I may need to change the school of my children. So high transaction cost negates the benefits of the moving. And then multi-purpose or multi-activity journeys lead to overvaluation, and it does not instantaneously change the demand and supply. So just let me give you a quick revision of what we have done. Hedonic price method, we say, is a powerful tool for environmental valuation. It provides insights into consumers' values and preferences for various characteristics of a property. But what happens is it requires very careful data collection, model specification and interpretation. You have just seen that we need to use a lot of regression equation. We have to add all the characteristics which can have an impact on the property value. So sometimes, or rather most of the times, we need to use statistical softwares to get these answers. So manually, it may not be possible to do this. So you need good statistical softwares and knowledge of statistics and econometrics if you want to do this particular modeling. So that is in hedonic price method. So hedonic price method and travel cost method are the two reveal preference methods. So this finishes off with the second type of valuation of environment, that is reveal preference method. In the next lecture, we will finish off the third technique which we use in environmental valuation, which is based on the market prices. So till then, thank you very much.